And just for those people who are online, is everyone okay? Any questions for the people online? All right. This should probably have said week 2, but whatever. I probably didn't do week 2 or part 2. It should probably have been week 4, part 2. Just so you guys aren't confused. All right. So back to video making again. And welcome back for those people that are doing videos. Yes. Is it too loud for you? Yeah, sure. If you want to turn it off, just unplug it. Right. So I think just a plug. Welcome back. We are COMP2112. Do you want me to do it? Just unplug it. It's just it's a HEPA filter, right? There you go. We are advanced client-side scripting, is what I like to call it, in the fall 2022 semester at Georgian, and it's week 4, part 2 of our broadcast and recording together. And in the last thing, we talked very, very briefly about local storage and those kind of things. In this video, we're actually going to do an example of what we need to do for this week and get you going within class exercise number 3. All right, so last week, what we did was, if you look up on, for me, I put it up on my desktop. So here is our stuff from last week, right? And I'm just going to talk about this. Last week, what I did was whenever we copy something from one week to the next, there's a couple steps we took, right? One is delete your node modules folder. That's what I recommend. Get rid of it. So right click, delete, shift delete, which is probably the right thing to do, right? And I'm doing this deletion because instead of it indexing all of those node modules that really don't belong to you, we can just download them through Yarn anyway. Okay, so that's one thing that we're going to do. So now that I've deleted node modules from my previous week, I can move on to the next this week. But we still have work to do. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. And even so, it's still quite a bit because of all the stuff that are in our Git repository. And any questions, by the way? I know that I'm going fast. Any questions or things that are come to your head? If you have questions or problems as we're going, stop me, because I will go like a train today. All right, so. Okay, so that's week 4. I'm going to pull up Visual Studio Code. So here's my Visual Studio Code. And I'm just going to drag and drop Visual Studio Code, the stuff from last week in there to Visual Studio Code. We had this structure last week. Last week, we talked about a tsconfig.json file. That's what we talked about. And we only talked about this simple configuration that we did here, right? Where we said the target is F2022. Our module pattern is common.js, and our source maps are true. That's what I've kind of turned on. I also talked about a way of transpiling. What is the key sequence? Do you remember the key sequence we had to use to transpile or start transpiling our code? Does anyone remember that? In Visual Studio Code, there's a key sequence, some shortcut keys that I can use to start the transpilation process. Do you guys remember that? Control-Shift-B. Control-Shift-B is what we're going to be using. Okay, so one of the biggest problems when using TypeScript, because we have an intermediary language, TypeScript is not going to be something that we can remember. Browsers don't understand TypeScript. Browsers only understand JavaScript. So what we need to do is transpile from TypeScript into pure JavaScript. And we're only going to attach the JS file in our HTML, not the TS file. TS and HTML have nothing to do with each other. All right, for now. So keep that in mind as we, as we code, because that's one of the things we're going to do. We also need to move our remote. Right now, our remote is pointing to our last repository. Remember, we did this last week, and I need to repoint the remote to the new repository. I don't have a new repository yet. Let's make one. So let's go back up to on here, and I'll go to GitHub. And what I want to do with this is maybe type in the right place. And here on our GitHub, my GitHub repository, I'm going to make a brand new repository here, and I'm going to probably call it something like COMP2112 in the fall 2022 semester, and it's week 4, right? I'm going to make it public, but again, for you guys, for in-class exercise 3, please make it private and include me as a collaborator, like I showed you last week. Okay, that's an important step, because you're going to need to do that for your assignment as well. Now that I create my project, it gives me steering directions here on GitHub. And what we need to do is remove the remote first before I do this. So back to Visual Studio Code, just like I showed you last time, I'm going to pull up the integrated terminal in VS Code. And what is the key sequence for that? I talked about that last week. Control backtick is a way to do it. You can also go through terminal as well. So if you go to terminal and you go new terminal, that's something you can do as well. And you can also go view terminal. So you can do that here through the menus, as well as your shortcut keys if you forget. So control backtick will bring up my terminal. And once I've done that, I want to clear. And I want to issue a command. Who remembers the command to remove my remote? Helena? Yeah, get remote. I already kind of said it by accident. Get remote. How do you? Okay, that shows us the remote. You don't have to, this is just showing us the remote. You don't need this one, but that's the first one we can use. So get remote, and then we want to do a remove and the name of a remote, which is origin. This is the name of our remote. We want to get rid of that. So we want to say origin is what we want to remove. So now that it's been removed, now we can go back to GitHub and use those last 3 lines of code that we just got from GitHub and repoint our GitHub repository, keeping all of our commits from last week and the week before to our new remote that we're going to point to, which is our new repository. Okay, this process should become more familiar for you over time. If it's not familiar or very uncomfortable right now, that's okay, because we're going to do this every time, so it's going to be like very easy to do. All right, so that means that I need to go back to GitHub. And remember, GitHub, when we make a new repository, gives us a few lines of code here where it says, or push an existing repository from the command line, this part. And we want to click this little copy button, and I go back to Visual Studio Code and right click, and then if I press enter, it's going to retarget my remote to the new repository, like so. Okay, I'm going to do a check. Are you with me? Okay, so see the process is remove the remote, make a new repository, or make a new repository, then remove the remote, right? Once you remove the remote is just almost like an entry that tells our local repository what we're pointing to. I don't want to point here, I want to point over there, right? And when I point to the new repository, I need to configure it, which is where we're getting that information from the new repository code. So there's nothing for us to actually type. We just copy it, right click in Windows, and paste it and press enter, and it's just done. Okay, yes.
Something's going sideways.
What's the thing that's going sideways?
No, it's just
Yeah, no problem. I understand.
It said here when I'm trying to look at it, file said out of another repository inside the
Right. Okay, so that means that, and sometimes it happens, if for whatever reason, let's suppose, and this is bad, notice that each of my weeks here, week 2, week 3, and week 4, if I look at week 2, it has a Git repository. If I look at week 3, it has a Git repository. If I look at week 4, it has a Git repository. Those are all separate. But if I, for whatever reason, put a Git repository here in this containing folder, right click and delete that Git repository, that hidden.git file folder in your containing folder. If you right click and delete that, then there's no more Git in the containing folder, the one that's above the other one you're just creating. Okay. So it's like a hierarchy of Git folders. You don't want that. You don't want a Git repository up here and then another one inside of your folder. You only want one. Okay.
Did you say the one that was,
The containing one, not your week 4 or your ICE 3 or whatever you want to call it, but the one above that somewhere,
oh,
right? That's the one you want to delete. Okay. And that might be anywhere. That could be in your C drive. That could be in your desktop. That could be somewhere else you've coded it. You need to do a little bit of a hunt for that one. So by accident, you've included a Git folder somewhere else. Okay, just letting you know. That's probably what's happened. I'm going to come back to you at the break. I'll see if I can help you out. Okay, I need to move on. Awesome. Okay. So now that we've got this, and the kind of again, the expectation is that you've at this point you've put it up on GitHub. We're going to do a clear. And the next step is I need to do a yarn install or a yarn install, right? So if I do a yarn install, what yarn install does is it looks inside my package.json file. My package.json file, remember, is our manifest for all of our project dependencies and dev dependencies. We talked about those two things. And our project dependencies are these ones, dependencies here, and our dev dependencies are these ones, nice to haves. So dev dependencies, again, as a review, we don't need them. We use them for us as developers, okay? And if I do a yarn install and press enter, it's going to download the node modules folder with all of its dependencies, both project dependencies and dev dependencies. And now we have our node modules folder, but notice that it is grayed out, right? And it's grayed out because of our .gitignore file. Our .gitignore file basically indicates that node modules will be ignored. Anything that's inside of there. It's a recursive ignore methodology, right? So anything that's inside of our gitignore file, if we mention a folder, everything inside that folder is ignored. Okay, just letting you know. So that is what we did last day. I'm just a bit of a review. Okay, that's what we did. Okay, so now that we've got our everything, our project back together, the first thing we need to do is test to see if it's working the way it worked last week, right? Because we don't want to make an assumption that things are working and start to code. We want to check to see if everything is as it was last day. So again, back to the terminal, I'm going to clear it up, and I'm going to use light server. So light-server. And remember what light server does is a little command we install with yarn, and it's going to pull up our browser and kind of do something called browser sync, which means it's going to sync up our browser with our project. So any change we make to the project is immediately seen in the browser. So it's good from a development perspective. Yes. Which is? Right. Don't worry about that. Right. So if I do light server, because license field means if you have a license like an MIT license or whatever, you can always add that later. All right. So that means that package.json, right? Right. Notice that we have an author. We have a license. This is what's missing, your license field. So if you just put a license field in your package.json, it'll take that warning away. Okay, notice what happened, right? Notice what happened. It kicked off a little server on this side, right? This is our browser. And on the VS Code side, you see this kind of feedback. This feedback, remember what these codes are. We talked about Ajax last week. 200 means, what does 200 mean from last week? Okay, it means everything's okay. What's a 404? File not found, right? So favicon, it's looking for a favicon, right? And you guys know what a favicon is, right? So it's just we don't have that in our page. Who cares? It's not required. Don't worry about it. Is my thing. It's going to look for it because the way that light server is built. It wasn't built by us. It was built by some third party. They look for a favicon, from a page. We don't have one, and don't worry about it. They're just giving us feedback. There's no favicon. I'm like, okay with it, right? What we want to do now is do a kind of a split when it comes to development. I usually use my Windows key left and put my Visual Studio Code on the left. And then I click on my browser and do a Windows key right arrow. And that kind of puts my browser on the right so I can see the effects of what I'm doing. All right. So last day, what I did was I talked about, I'm just going to kind of kill some of these Just, I'm going to kill this editor here. So on the left, we can see we have our data structure. Yes. What does it tell you? Okay, so there might be something that's blocked with your light server at all, somehow. There's also other ones. You can also take a look at HTTP server. There's a bunch of them out there you can download. Anyone will do. Any server that you can download with NPM. Okay, I can't diagnose your problem at this point. I'm sure there is something we can do about it, but it might be some other code that you're using, that you're running in the background, a service that you're using, something that's blocking that from working. Okay. Okay, get ignored. So, oh, what happened last week? Did you not make it last week with me? Okay, it's okay. What that means is that this will not be grayed out right now. It's going to be active. It's going to be like kind of white, right? So grayed out means it looks like a gray color as opposed to a white color like this, right? And this means that it's probably going to be included when you push it up to GitHub. Okay. On that, now that we've run everything and we can run it from this side to this side, I'm going to do the next part, which is transpile. Right. So I'm going to do a Control-Shift-B while I have this side highlighted. Control-Shift. I'm holding those two buttons down, pressing the B key, and I'm going to get this little pop-up that says, okay, you want to initiate a task runner. That's what this thing is. A task runner is just a little program that works in VS Code. Again, nothing to download. And then you can decide what kind of, how you're going to do your tasks. And there's two types of tasks that have been detected because we have our tsconfig.json in our code. VS Code is smart enough to say, wait, they have a tsconfig.json. Most likely they want to run a TypeScript task, which is a TypeScript, kind of transpile. There's two ways to transpile TypeScript using this runner. One is the build task. The build task does it once. So once you use build, if I just clicked on build up here, it's going to do it one time and it's going to be done. Okay. Or you can use a watch task. All right. And what the watch task does is it's almost like an event handler. It waits for any files to be changed on your site with respect to TypeScript, and then it'll automatically transpile for you. I'm going to be using the watch task here. Okay. So the watch task will run in the terminal window. Now, what if you can't make the task runner work? That's also something that students go and have a problem with. Okay, so let's do one of these. So I'm just going to type in, I'm just going to maximize this to show you for a second. So what if I can't run this task runner or whatever? I'm just going to press Control-C a bunch of times. You know, as an example, I'm going to terminate the task and I'm going to show you. Let's suppose I couldn't do it for some reason, right? That's okay. You can always do it manually. Remember that up here in my terminal window, I can also add other terminals right here with this little plus button. See this little plus button right here in the terminal window? I can add more terminals, right? That means I can integrate more consoles that are hidden behind each other in tabs. These are all tabs on the right. And I can literally switch between one terminal and the other. That's what I'm doing here, okay? So in this new task, I could do it manually. I can type in TSC and then -W, which is the watch task. And I can just do it like that, and that'll do the exact same thing. So if you can't initiate the watch task with Control-Shift-B for some reason, maybe those keys are different for you if you're using a Mac or something like that, then you can always do TSC -W in your command, on your command line, and it'll totally work. No issues, okay? So now that I'm transpiling, I've got this task going. That means if I do anything with my script over here, like example, if I change my app.ts, let's go into my app.ts now, double click. And this is what we did last time. Again, review, we kind of talked about how to put together our own load data method. And we talked about different how to write functions in different ways. What are the three ways that I talked about last week to write functions? I talked three ways, about three different function kind of syntax. What's one way? Named function, like this one, right? Function, load data, that's a named function. What's another way? An arrow function, there's another third way. What? I see here, if is a no-named anonymous function, right? Which is the same thing as an arrow function without the arrow, right? And iffy is another kind of function. It's a closure that we're going to use. And the closure allows us to create almost like a faux namespace that encapsulates all our code and stops our variables from going into the global namespace, which is not what we want, right, when we're coding, okay? All right, so we did these functions. We created the load data function, but I showed you that it's way easier just to use our jQuery. Here's our jQuery function from last day, and the jQuery function does the exact same thing with 3 lines of code, and I didn't have to include all of this. Okay, this is our own little code that we use. Okay, so for today, let's wipe this out. We don't need this little function here, this function load data. That was just our test for understanding how to use Ajax. And we're going to be using jQuery for this for today. So I'm just going to clean up my code. That's what I'm doing here. And now that I've cleaned up my code, I'm going to make my first push to GitHub for my project, right? Beyond everything that I've done. So I'm going to save. It's going to transpile. And notice that in my app.js now, all I have is that one start function, right? So I'm looking at app.js, not because I want you to code in it. Please don't make the mistake of coding in your app.js. It will be clobbered. It will be wiped out every time I do anything in my app.ts function, in my app.ts file, right? The app.js is an output. It's something that is emitted when I'm transpiling. So you don't want to put anything by hand inside of your app.js file. Please don't do that. Work only with your app.ts file. Realistically, we can configure our tsconfig.json file so that it emits the app.js in another folder altogether. We're not going to do that today, all right? But I'm telling you that your tsconfig.json is configurable, so you can make it so that it can hide the JS file so you don't have to be confused. It'll be maybe in some kind of dist folder, like distribution, where I'm going to use the distribution folder for my actual files that's going to link to my HTML, not my TS file, because my TypeScript file and HTML don't compute. There's no connection for them, right? So, but for now, we don't care about that. It's all in one folder. It's in the scripts folder right now, and we can see all the scripts that are generated. This might be a good thing. What I'm going to do now is push these changes to GitHub. So I'm going to go back to my terminal. Notice that I have both of my terminals here are in use, and I'm going to make another one. So now I have 3 terminals, one that's running my light server, one that's running my transpile process, and one that I'm going to use for terminal commands with GitHub, right? So I'm going to say something like git init, git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say added or updated project files, And that's going to update everything. That's my new commit. By the way, if you ever want to see all of your commits on your Git repository locally, you can always issue a git status command like this, git status. And it'll show you that your branch is good. So that's the first thing. So if your branch is good, it says a couple of things here. It says your branch is ahead of origin main by 1 commit. Okay. So what does this mean? What does your branch ahead of origin main by 1 commit mean? What does that mean? Yes.
It means that you need to use the repository.
Which repository?
Local.
Your local repository has been changed. I haven't pushed it to the remote yet. It's perfect. Exactly what's happening. So I've made changes locally, but remotely on my GitHub, nothing changed, right? So I need to push now, but let's do the next one. The next command that I want to show you today is git log. Git log. Git log shows me all of the commits that we've done so far for the project, or at least the latest ones. And you can see here that I have my my new commit. This is the commit number. Look how big it is. That's the commit hash. It says that this is the head, right? But look where origin main is. Origin main, which is online, that's the online GitHub repository. It's behind 1 commit. Notice that they are separate. Origin main is here, and the head of my local repository is here, which means locally we're 1 commit ahead from my branch remotely. We need to make that so that they're synchronized. And the way to synchronize that is I'm just going to press Q here at the bottom. So press Q. Q escapes from this list. That's what it does. And now we're just going to do a git push. And when I do a git push everything up to GitHub, it should accept your pushes. And if I do a git log again, let's do a git log so you can see what that is. You can see now that those 2 things are synchronized. See the top there, head and origin? are one. They're the same level, which means the remote repository and my local repository are in sync. They're the exact same commit. Guys, this is a key learning when it comes to using Git and GitHub. You have two repositories you're managing, right? One that's local to your machine, one that's in the cloud in GitHub. And what you want to do is synchronize between the local repository and your cloud repository. If you do this, then everything is going to be golden and you're not going to cry, right? When your 2.5-year-old, spills, some kind of juice on your laptop, right? It's not going to happen, right? Or if you have a dog, a cat, or some kind of lizard, and it does something else bad, to your laptop or your desktop, right? Your laptop might be destroyed in the end, but your data, which is more important, no, it's not. But in this case, it isn't. But your data will be preserved. Okay, this is the idea. You're going to be securing your data forever. Okay, with this kind of process. Okay, cute. So now that we've pushed to our remote, again, this is the review piece. I'm trying to review what we've done so far and get you to understand the process, our workflow that we're working in. Because once you have your workflow, now you can start working properly. Remember, we always want to test and recap. What we did was we copied our files over if we need to. Okay, number one, we test to see if everything's still working the way it was last week. Somehow nothing broke. Okay, which is good. We made sure we transpiled, which is important because if we're using TypeScript, one of the biggest things that people come to me and say, I don't see a change, Tom. I don't know why. I did my file, the things I did, you did the same thing. I did the same thing as you, exactly the same, they say, right? But it's not working. And then my question to them is, did you transpile? And they're like, oh man, I forgot, right? It's a very common thing. It may happen to you, right? You might be going like, I forgot to transpile and I've been working and I've been trying to troubleshoot what the problem is, but my problem is I didn't transpile, right? So that's why I get the transpiling going right away, okay? And then of course, this whole Git and GitHub thing, which is going to help us secure our code. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen now and finally do some work. Any questions about this process before I move on? Last day, what we had was data. We had data inside of a context.json file. What I want to do right away is I want to just to demonstrate our local storage. I want to take this data and I want to put it into local storage. Okay, how do we do such a thing? Well, remember going back to our app.ts, we get the data here, right? So we got the data and our data is right here. Our data source contact list is here, okay? It's inside of our get JSON little call, the thing that we're doing with jQuery. It's where it is. Remember, here's something. Can I make a variable? Actually, I'll talk about this. I'll say, what if I made a variable called data, right? Here's data. And well, in here, right, I did something like this where I said data, right, is equal to our data source. Can I do this? So I want to get my data source and I want to say my, we'll do contact list, sure. And this will be our, how about we, instead of calling it data, we'll call it contact list. How about this? Even better. Contact list. There's our contact list. So I'm not going to make it data. I'm going to make it contact list. And then if I do a console log here, whoa. What can you expect for the contact list? Is it going to work? What are your thoughts? Don't try it. Tell me. I want you to look at it and diagnose it as a developer. Will this work? How about this? Does it look like it'll work? It looks like it should work, right? Is it going to work? How about, what do you think? I want you to give me your thoughts. Yeah, tell me. Okay. Should it work though?
Yes.
Well,
The variable set outside of the,
but wait a minute. Wait a minute. Didn't we talk last week about the asynchronous nature of JavaScript? Didn't we say that the only time it's going to happen is when it feels like it? Well, how can we predict when the get JSON, kind of functionality is going to work? We can't guarantee that by the time we go to our console log, it's done. But yet, you say it's okay, right? If I do that and go back to this, and if I go back and again to see the console, what's the command to see the console from our browser? What is it? There's a command shortcut keys that we can use too. What's the commands? Control-Shift-J. Control-Shift-J is also another way of getting your browser right there. Mine's undefined.
I had the console log in the,
That's okay. That's okay, right? The asynchronous nature of JavaScript. It looks like it's going to work, but it can never work. And the reason why it can't work is because our browser, or our server, which is in this case light server, is going to respond whenever it feels like, right? So we can't do this. This is a nice idea that we had, but it's false. It's not going to work. We could, but then we couldn't do this. That's not going to help us because if we define it inside of a function, the let will live and die inside that function, right? And it'll cause us an error, right? So we can't do that. We could call another function though within that thing, right? And that's what we can do. Yes.
Callback.
We could use a callback, something inside of here. We could do something like that as well, right? But remember what I'm trying to say is you cannot guarantee when your contact list will be full up with data from your file because, and this is the thing that people get to, because they're like, I don't understand why it's not happening. It should work. It totally loaded last time. The asynchronous nature of JavaScript is what we're going to say. That's why. You can't. You got to do the call in here. So if I was to do something like that, and I want to output stuff, then I would do it in here. That would work, right? So if I did something like, I don't know, let's do a console log of my contact list here, right? That we can certainly do, right? And if I go back, you can see certainly that I have all that information, right? That's where it comes down to. There it is, right? So that I can do, but that's trapped inside that function. So I got that function, it gets the data, but it's trapped, right? So I could have a callback function or some kind of other function outside of start that I use, something like I'm going to do something like, let's say we call it something like transfer data. I want to transfer my data, from my file somehow, line by line, I don't know, over to my local storage. Okay, but look, before we get there, let's do some tests. What does that look like? I'm just going to undo this one. I'm just going to kill the console log just so we don't see that noise. So no more noise, right? What I want to do is think about local storage. Let's think about how this works. If I do something like, hey, local storage, I want to, and I recommend instead of actually using the key directly, you set item. That's probably a better way to do it. So if I do something like, let's set an item, and in our set item method, I want to set up a key, which is the string, and my value, which is the value that I'm going to store. Remember, we're storing it in key value pairs. That's what I'm doing, right? So let's say the key is, example, something like, the name or an ID 1, right? Let's say the name is called 1, or let's say 0, doesn't matter, okay? And let's say the data that I'm storing is something like this, where I say, Tom. There we go. I'm storing Tom. You can store your name. That's what I'm storing inside of my, in local storage. I do something like this, right? If I do this, something like this, and if I go back to here, you don't see anything, right? There's nothing in the console. What we can look at, just going to maximize here. Notice that there's other tabs that are across the board here, right? So we have sources, performance, network, as an example. And we also have something called application. Pull up the application tab for me, all right? Under the application tab, you're going to see a couple things. I have a couple things I've stored. I've stored P1648236490250, right? This thing. And I have Peter Parker, right? Spider-Man and Dr. Strange and Steve Rogers. I did this ahead of time to show you that in my local host 3000, I can store whatever I want, okay? But here's mine. Here's local key 0, and it has a value of Tom. You should see this for yourself, right? So this is where everything is stored. It's inside of local storage under the site that you're accessing, which is this one. That's how it works, okay? Session storage, you can also include something like a user item. Usually I use session storage for logging in and logging out, right? Because it will not survive a complete browser restart, okay? That's what it will not survive. But it will survive a browser refresh, right? Which is something. So if I'm logged in, session storage, I save it there. If I'm storing data, it's local storage. That's what I'm going to be doing. By the way, again, the API, the way it works, all the methods are the exact same. set item, get item, delete, all those kind of things. Okay, so that's what it is. If I want to delete something manually from here, for example, let's say I want to get rid of this one, I can just delete each one of these things here, right click and delete, right click and delete. I can delete manually. Okay, that's what I can do. I can delete manually. And I can clear up my local storage that way as well. All right, so this is where local storage lives. It lives in the application object in your browser. Okay. So now you know, and knowing is part of it, right? Cookies. Let's take a look at cookies. If there's any cookies, they're stored here as well. This is where it's stored under your application. Cookies is where we store some stuff. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, now that we know that, let's go back to our console. And I want to be able to store, I want to read stuff. This is my scope right now. I want to read things in from my file. So I'm reading from our JSON file, passing it in somehow into our project, and passing it out back into our local storage. And when I pass it from local storage into our file, it has to be in some kind of structure. Okay. So let's think about what we can do. And I want you guys to help me brainstorm a little bit. So here's my context.json. I have my full name, my contact number, and my email address. What structure in your mind would you use to, to set this up? I want to read data from my local storage, and I want it to be in a well-structured thing, container. What would I make? How about a class, right? I want to use a new class and make a new class, let's say a contact, the contact class, where I store my full name, contact number, and email address. Those will be the three properties of the class. And I can output from the class to local storage. So it's almost like a middle step. This is what I'm going to be doing, right? I can go from, as an example, my file into my class. I can create an object, right? And then from my class as a middleman, if you will, I can take that and I can output it to anywhere I want, okay? Okay. Classes. We talked about that very briefly last time. Question for you guys. Should I make a class inside of my app.ts file? Like put it here, like maybe some kind of, a contact class? Should I do that? What are your thoughts? As a developer, is it good practice? Yes. Sure. We could, but it's not a best practice to doing direct stuff. I'd rather manipulate my data in a class because then I have other options. For example, maybe it's not going to be local storage in the future. Maybe it's going to be an actual database, right? Then local storage, my stuff direct is going to be, I have to rewrite it by that point, right? I'm going to prepare you for what we're going to do next semester, where I'm going to actually do full CRUD with MongoDB or something like that, right? I'm not going to do it with you. It's going to be rich, but it doesn't matter, right? You should be able to write any place, not just your local storage. Your code should be flexible enough. Now, going back to my question, I want to make a class. That's my thoughts, right? Should I make a class inside of the same file here, inside of my app.ts file? What are your thoughts? It's a terrible idea, right? And I'll tell you why it's a terrible idea. It's not as testable, right? To be honest with you, we want to separate concerns. We've been talking about MVC pattern for the, at the beginning. I want to always have every class should have its own file, right? Which means now I'm going to move into a new thing that for you guys maybe, which is separate files for every class that I do, right? Everything that I'm creating, all my files are separated. And that's going to mean some trickiness. Let's talk about building a class first before we do anything else. So right click onto your scripts folder, and I want to do a new file. That's one way of doing it, okay? The new file is going to be the contact.ts file, contact.ts. So this might be new learnings for you at this point, okay? We're making a brand new file. We're splitting our files between, or splitting our code across two files, right? And this is something new. I'm going to declare the new file as a class, right? We're going to say something like this. The class name is going to be contact with a capital C. And inside my contact class, I'm going to have curly braces like this. I'm going to just scaffold it out with you guys right now. Here's the first one. The first part is I need a constructor, right? After the constructor, I'm going to have some public methods, right? Or functions. I'm also going to have potentially some private methods, right? And you know what? Maybe someplace, like maybe up here, some kind of private instance members. Sometimes we call these fields, right? As well as some kind of public properties. That's the thing that all classes should have, no? Correct me if I'm wrong, please. If you would do it a different way. I'm just scaffolding it out here. All I'm doing is just putting comments. It's like a structure. I'm planning to make a class, and I'm structuring it out before I write the first piece of code. Okay. So what I want to start with is my constructor function. I want to start thinking about what it's going to look like. So here I use the constructor keyword, and in my constructor, I'm thinking about taking probably things like my full name, my contact number, and my email address. Let's do that. So maybe my full name is a string. So full name, which will be of type string. My contact number and email address, contact number, which will be a string as well. And my email address, which will be a string. Oops. Make sense? Constructor function. All right. But we need to store this information that's incoming, right? And I'll talk about some stuff in a second, right? How to do this. Private instance members. Let's make some private instance members here. So my first private instance member, I'm going to use private, the keyword private, and the name of my full name. But I want to make it so that it's full name lowercase f, not full name capital F. Full name capital F is going to be my public property, right? That's going to be my getter and setter. Full name lowercase f, I'm going to use as my private instance member, okay? So that's the convention I'm going to be using for this semester, for the most part. There's other conventions where they use M underscore, where M is member, underscore means private, and then the name of your instance variable. I'm not going to do that this semester. But you would just do something like full name, all right? And that's going to be of type string. And I'm going to probably do the other ones too. So full name, contact number, as well as a private email address. Okay, so those are the private instance members, right? Those are the fields. I want to make my public properties here, but I don't know how to make them because I've never used TypeScript before. How do I do such things, right? Well, remember, anything you want to do in TypeScript, if you're not fully aware of how to do that, please look at the manual that's online. It's the best manual you can possibly use. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to typescriptlang.org. Typescriptlang.org is your place where you have all your docs. At the top here, we did this last week when we did a playground. Remember this playground we made? We had this little playground. We did this. Well, there's also a handbook. If you go to handbook, it shows you the handbook here, right, of everything. If I click on classes on the left-hand side, it's going to show you how to create class members, right? As well as if you scroll down enough, right, it'll show you how to make properties, right? So that's getters and setters. So if you keep going down there, it talks about constructors. And if you go further down, which is really neat, here are your getters and setters. Take a look, right? We just used the keyword get, right, in TypeScript. Get is your accessor. It accesses the data from your data member. And set is your mutator, and it mutates or changes the data in your data member, right? Here, the data member that they're using is called length, underscore. Underscore length means private, right? We're not going to use that methodology this semester. But this is what I want to do. So going back to this, I want to use a get method, right? Notice that the name has to be something that's related to the private instance variable. So get full name, capital F. One thing to note and remember is that JavaScript is case sensitive. So full name capital F and full name lowercase f, two different things, right? Just to remember. So we're going to get full name. We're going to return a string type. I'm going to be very explicit here. And what it's going to do is I'm going to return this dot full name, lowercase full name. Okay, that's the getter. And as a setter, well, dry setter, I'm going to say, let's set my full name. And full name, what you can do is you can pass in a value. Notice here that it says value, right? But you can call this thing whatever you want. Like, let's say, for example, name, which is a string, right? And then you can say that something like this dot full name, lowercase f, is equal to name. Okay. Questions around the first getter and setter that we made so far with our class. Here's a question. I'm going to ask you this again. I ask this of all my students. Why do we need getters and setters? I've asked this before. Why do I need them? Yes. Why don't I want to directly work with variables? That's true. Yes. Nope. That's not exactly true. Why don't I want to have directly access to my data members? How about the ladies over here? You're so quiet today, right? And I'm going to go back over to this side again. I will go around too. I mean, I'm not afraid to walk. I can walk. So we have access, right? I mean, because they're private, we don't have access, but I can make them public. So why even do this? Why do that separation? Why have public properties and private instance members? Why? To avoid being mutated is a good answer. What else? What else about ladies? I know it's early in the morning. Maybe you haven't had your coffee, and all that kind of stuff. But tell me why. Tell me why. Can you? In an interview, I would ask that same question, right? Okay, I'm going to walk over here. Elena, tell me what. Tell me what. Why do I want this separation? What do I want? Right? Why not just directly access something? Right? You mentioned some things. But what else? Anybody else in my
No synchronous nature of JavaScript.
No, but I like to think. Yes. What else? Protect my data. Yes, we talked about that. How about this even easier way? If I directly mutate or even get data from a data member, right? Do I have any control of over what's happening? Can I do things like analysis of who's accessing it? Can I set something else at the same time? Can I do any kind of testing that I want to do on that data? Any of those things? The answer is no, right? I have no control. It's direct access. I set it and it's done, right? Again, I go back to the video game example, right? Where if you have a character in the video game, right? And I have the character's health, which is a data member, and somewhere else I have some kind of high score or health property, like a health bar. How do I update that health bar? I have to update the health bar so when the character takes damage, the health bar goes down. It happens in your mutator. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to create an extra listener to listen to see when that thing changes. It's right here. This is your listener, right? You're making it so that if anything happens, you can do testing. You can do other things. If you take this away, you have no control over what happens with your data. Okay, that's the reason why. So back to this. That's why we use this. Let's make getters and setters for our other properties. So again, here's something. It'd be nice if I can right click on a property like this, right? And if I can make my getters and setters in here, wouldn't it be nice, right? Well, VS Code might give us that option, right? It says remove unused declaration, right? It says that. And it might say that for the other one too. But those are the things it says. Quick fix, remove the declaration. But it'd be nice if we can do that. I'm just going to copy paste this whole thing to save time. So copy it twice, and we'll rename everything. All right. Now be careful when you copy paste because you can rename terribly, right? And we want to name it like contact number. That's the next one. So contact number. And of course, this dot contact number is what we want to do. I'm just setting up, what this does is it allows me to set up the structure a little easier without the curly braces and the set and get. That's all it saves me, right? So contact number, right, where contact number is equal to this. Okay, so that's my getter for the contact number. My setter, or the setter, I made a mistake. Let's try that again. Contact number. See, be careful what you do. I said I didn't do it. That's okay. Okay. I'm just going to do this quickly so you can see it, and then we'll share the data on Discord, GitHub. Any questions around this process, my friends? If you're confused about something, this is the best time to do this, to tell me, because we're going to move fast, like I said, after this. Any confusion around this? Anybody? Shouldn't be, but just in case there is, that's why I'm asking. All right. So that is your getters and setters. So I got full name and set full name, right? I got contact number and set contact number. I got email address and set email address, and I changed all the names like normal. That's it, so they make sense. And now in my constructor function, I'm going to use my, there's two ways to do this. I can directly access my private instance members, or I can use my getters and setters. Now, best practices are, depending on the language, if you're doing it in Java, it won't let you do it. If you're doing it in C#, it'll let you do it. If you do it in C++, it'll let you do it. And if you do it in JavaScript, it'll let you do it. All right. So it really depends on the language. Here, it'll let us do it. So I can do something like this dot, and again, contact, full name, capital F, right, is equal to the full name, lowercase f, right? I can do that. And this dot contact number is equal to contact number. And this dot email address is equal to email address. So I can do those things. Make sure you put your semicolons. We do that so that way when we construct our object, if I construct my object, then I have all those things, kind of constructed here. But sometimes I want to make an empty object, right? I want to make an empty object because it's easier to make empty containers. And then I want to set up my data later, right? I want to do that. And for this, in other languages, I could use a second constructor function, right? What happens when I have a second constructor function? What is that called, right? So who said that? Overloading? Overloading. And again, I'm going to go back to you. What's the difference? I've asked this question before. What's the difference between overloading and overriding? There's two different things there. Overloading and overriding. You're correct with overloading. I want to overload my constructor function. What about overriding? What do I do there? What does that mean? Okay. If you guys don't know, it's okay. We're going to talk about it once. I will ask you these questions again. We're going to talk about this the entire semester because you guys have to know this stuff. If you don't know it, then it's okay. Don't be asked. It's more like if I have a superclass, right? Let's say, for example, I had another superclass called person. And since my contact is a person, right? Then I would inherit from my person class, right? Like we said before. And then if I had in my person class some method, right, that I wanted to change, so it would work differently, polymorphism, in my child class, right? Then I would use an override, right? I would override the function so it would work differently and be more specialized from my child class compared to how it worked in my parent class. Just talking terms. This is all object-oriented programming 101. Okay. You guys are good with object-oriented programming? No? No? You've never done classes before? Okay, and you've never done classes in any other language before. You don't take C# or C or anything else. You did C#? You didn't. But you said you did C#? Any other language? You did Python? What? It depends on the cohort and your program that you're in. Some programs, if you're in a program like a fast track or something weird like that, or if you're in whatever, you're doing this course, but you could be on a different program. Like, let's say you're not a web dev, you're doing it from some other thing, then you may have not had some other, you might have had C#, but somebody else may not.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm in the web design.
Right. But you've done any other language or just JavaScript?
I've done Python before.
Okay. All right. Really through Java. Okay. So some of you don't really understand object-oriented programming.
Not understand it, it's just.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go with that. You understand how this is. I'm going to assume you understand, and then I'm going to circle back and fix your knowledge. It's going to slow me down again today. Damn it. Okay. That's okay, but that's okay. That's okay. Remember, I'm bringing you up to the level that I need you at. If I was going to work with you, I need you to understand this stuff, guys, if you're developing with me, right? Because if you don't understand what OOP, then it's going to make it a mess later. All right. Anyway, so back to that then. Private instance members and public properties is called data hiding, or encapsulation is the keyword that we use. Encapsulation is a process when we create a class that hides private instance members and shows public properties. That is what it's called, encapsulation or data hiding. It's a principle of OOP, object-oriented programming, right? When we create a set of classes right now, what we're certainly starting to do is create our structure. All I'm doing is structuring my code so that way I can receive data in your mind, that's what you should think about it, from our file, and I can play with that data, mutate it, and send it back out somewhere else to our local storage or database or whatever it's going to be. Okay, that's why I'm doing this. We talked about overloading our constructor function. That means I can, in other languages, I would make separate constructors. Here, it's a little easier. We can use something called default parameters or parameter values, right? So here in our string for full name, we can say that if you don't enter a full name value, then we can give you a default, right? We can say that in our constructor function signature. Sorry, if I'm using words that you don't understand or you don't like, if it makes you uncomfortable, good, right? Good, right? I'm trying to push your boundaries here a little bit, right? So that's what I'm doing. So in my constructor function, I have a signature. The signature is the parameters that I'm going to put up here. Remember that the constructor function, when we look at constructors in general, a constructor function is triggered when we create our object for the first time, and never again. Yes. Signature means your parameter list that's inside the function parameters, and any return types. If it was a non-constructor function. So if I was to make my own function called, say hi or whatever, say hi, the say hi function would have a parameter list, whatever I want, or none, right? And some kind of return type. The parameter list and the return type and the name of the function is my signature. That's the signature of my function, right? If I have a separate signature, same name, say hi, different parameter list, different return type, that is overloading. I would overload my function. I have two separate types of functions, and it gives the user an opportunity to have different functionalities. So sometimes I might only want to have one parameter for a function. Like I only want to pass in just one thing. Sometimes I want to pass in a bunch of things to my function. Those are two different scenarios, right? I could write separate functions for those things. So for example, the name, say hi with the name of the person I want to say hi to, or just say hi with no parameters. Same function name, different parameters. That means different signatures. I'm overloading. I'm making new things, okay? So here, I don't have to do that. I just can make default names. So for example, here, my full name, I can call, my string is unknown name, right? Right? My contact number will be something like no contact number. And my email address, I'm setting up as no email address. Unknown, or how about unknown email address. So these are just values that I'm putting up. So whether I set things up or not, right? Whether I set things up or not, if I can choose now in my constructor function, take a look. If I hover over my constructor function, Visual Studio Code says, there's a little question mark here next to my parameter name. That question mark means it's optional. I can put it in or I can leave it out. That's what it means. If I leave out my full name, the value is going to be unknown name. Okay, that's what it's going to mean. All right. I can also create I can use documentation for this. I can say something like, all right, go back and get rid of this. Thank you. And use documentation for this and go /**, use document this and press enter, and it's going to give me a list of parameters, right? Here's my parameter list. And look what it says. The parameter type is a string. My full name, contact number, right? And email address have default values. Those are the default values. The square brackets tell you that those are the default values for each of those parameters. Okay, so that is my constructor function. If I hover over now, it's going to say constructor contact for it's an instance of contact, and there's a bunch of parameters here. Okay, before I move on, are you with me so far? Did I lose you yet? Hopefully not. How about the ladies over here? You guys are very quiet and it worries me, right? No, I can't lose you. Okay. Are you okay? You're tired? Okay. All right. And the ladies and the gentlemen over here on this side, Elena. Can you put /***? You didn't get that? Did you download document this? An extension on VS Code? Remember I added this. What's your left comment? Right? How about, are we good? You good? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. Sorry. I know I'm slowing down and I don't want to, but I have to. So I'm just going to split this over 2 lines here so you can see it over a couple lines, okay? Okay. So now that we've created our constructor, we also have our getters and setters and our full name, contact number, email address properties, our private fields. What I want to do is I want to create a public overridden method. Okay, remember that all objects in JavaScript have a toString method, right? If I kind of take an object in JavaScript and put something, the object name .toString, it should be able to work, right? And it looks like this. I'm just going to hop back to my app.ts for a second to show you this. If I said I want to take my contact list and go toString, right? If I said toString like that, then I should be able to do toString method in JavaScript. And for you to look up the toString method in JavaScript, let's look it up online to give you additional documentation. So if I went to here and if I said toString method JavaScript, right? If you look anything up here, you can see that it's toString with a lowercase 2 and an uppercase capitals S for string, toString method. That's what it's going to look like. I want to make our own toString method. So this is operator or method overriding, right? Because I'm overriding the superclass. Remember, all objects in JavaScript, all classes in JavaScript inherit from the super object class. It exists whether you like it or not. Okay, it's called object, right? So I can go to that object superclass that has a toString method, and I want to override it and change it for ourselves. So it actually makes sense for us, when we use it. So here, back to our contact class, right? Back to our contact class. In our public methods area, I want to make a public. It's going to return a string. It's going to be called toString, right? toString. And my public toString method is going to return a string, right? And what I want to do is I want you to think about how I would show, I want to show my full name, right, out to the console in a very nice way. Okay, I want to show the full name nicely. So instead of, if I have a contact, I can say contact toString, and it'll just output my content in a really nicely structured way to the console, like almost like a pretty way, okay? So we can do something like this. I can say something like my, and it's almost like I want to create a temporary string or some kind of output string, right? And I want to initialize it as an empty string. And then in my toString method, what I want to do is I want to build my output string. So I'm going to say output string, and I could do the plus equals thing and add it together, right? I could do that, right? And that's not impossible to do. You can say something like, this dot full name, capital F, this dot full name, and then I can do something like add it together, where I can do something like my full name is this full name, right? I can do this kind of thing. You've seen this before. This is called string concatenation. I could do this, right? But it's better for me to use the backtick character because the backtick character gives me something else. What kind of string am I making when I use the backtick character? It's called string interpolation, but what am I going to do? What's the backtick character? What kind of string am I making when I use the backtick character? It's an ES6 thing. Template string is what it's called. Template strings. So template strings are used when I use the backtick character. So backtick, right? And this way I don't have to concatenate like I'm doing here. This is old school if I did it this way. Instead of doing it this way, what I want instead is to interpolate, which is inject. All right, so I want to do something like this, where I say this dot full name. That's string interpolation. I want to interpolate or inject. You said it right, in string injection, but object injection or value injection. I want to inject the value of my string inside of this output string. That's what I want. Okay. Next, I want to do the same thing, but with the other ones, and I want to also have some kind of \n character. \n means new line, right? So it's going to go to the next line. It's going to output that way onto the console, right? So I want to do that same thing, and I want to copy paste. So I'm constructing my output string, right? And here it'll be full name, contact number. And let's make the contact number so it looks like this. So it's nicely spaced, and email address. So I'm making this work make it nice, right? And then in here, it would be obviously contact number and email address. Okay. And then what I want to do at the end is I want to return the output string. Okay, so that's my toString method. And it's an overloaded method because it exists already in the output superclass. And I'm overriding it. I mean, so overloading, same signature and the same class, different signature in the same class of the same function name, but other outputs, right? Or other functionality. Here, overriding, I'm taking something that I've inherited, which is toString, and I'm changing the output. What toString will give me is different for this class than any other class. Okay, and then of course I can document that, right? So I can say something, this method overrides the built-in toString method for the contact class. So notice that this is my own little help for you as a developer. If I was to write a little method and I use documentation like this, then you as a developer, when you're seeing this, you would go, okay, I understand what to do now because Tom has given me some information about what this thing does, right? Save. Okay. Let's start with this. Let's start with this class here. All right. So I've got some stuff. And, so what I want to do, here's the next step. Let's put this up on GitHub and let's also attach it. So I've made this really beautiful class. Yes. But guess what, guys? You can never use it yet. And then I want to tell you this so you hear me. Remember we talked about the asynchronous nature of JavaScript? That's a trip. You can trip over that, right? If you don't think about how asynchronous JavaScript is. That's one obstacle or stumbling block people have, right? Another one is Control-Shift-B, transpile. If you don't remember to transpile, bad things will happen to good people, right? And you're like, wait, I don't know why, but it's not transpiling. And well, yeah, because you didn't press transpile. And here's the third one. You need to attach your classes or your other files to your HTML file. Your index.html, my friends, is your manifest, is everything that it connects everything into your index.html file in order for you to use it. If you don't connect your contact class to your index.html file, even if we reference it in another class, it will never work, ever. It needs to be included before you use it as well. That's also a thing. It has, there's a specific order I recommend. Take a short break after this, because I know you guys are, I'm frying your brain right now, okay? So let's go into, to do that. So inside of my project structure, now that I have my contact class, I want to connect it. And to do that, I'm going to go into my index.html file for a second. Notice what we have at the bottom. We have our JavaScript section in our index.html, and we have here scripts app.js, right? We need to connect our contact.js before we access our app.js. Why?
Because we have to go during my contact. It needs to access the contact because there's behavior in the outlet that relies on it.
It will rely on it for sure. So if you're gonna rely or access my contact class, it has to be in line. I recommend it to cause the least amount of problems. This is not necessarily, and if you know JavaScript very well, you're gonna be like, no, that's not true, Tom. You're gonna be right, but it'll cause the least amount of problems if you do it this way, compared to if you do it another way. So what I need to do is inside of my index.html, I need to create another script file, a script, element. And the script element should have a source that is /scripts /contact.js. Make sure it's JS, not TS. And now we've attached our contact class we just wrote to the index.html, which makes it available to the greater browser cache. Now I can start using it. If I didn't do this and I tried to use it, it would show that I have access, but we would never work in the browser ever without this, right? So that's what I'm doing. There's two different files here, and I'm just connecting to them. Nice. Excellent. Okay. Testing, and then we'll put it up on GitHub, and then you'll have my file, my code. All right. So in my app.ts now, okay, cool. I have, let's not do local storage yet. Let's get rid of the local storage thing for a second. But what I want to do is I want to make an object, right? An object called contact, right? New contact object. And I want to store the first contact from my contact list in it. How do we do such things? Well, let's do it. So I'll say, okay, fine, I got my data. And after I got my data, so this is here in this line, let's comment a little bit. So get your data from the data source, right? That's what I'm doing here. That's what's happening. And then afterwards, load your data into objects, right? And the object I'm going to make, I'm only going to do it once for now, is I'm going to make a brand new contact, right? So I'm going to call this thing contact. And of course, I need to use the let keyword to create it. Let contact equal to a new contact, capital C. And if I do this, it gives me this. It gives me information about how I can do it, right? It pulls up my constructor signature and it says, hey, Tom, you can do a full name, a contact number, and an email address, or if I want to, I can do nothing if I want. Because all of those parameters are optional because I've given them default values. To show you this, let's start with this. Let contact is equal to new contact, no parameters, right? And then let's output this to the console. Console.log contact.toString. Okay. And if I did that, and if I go back to my browser, then you're going to see this. If you get something else like, cannot find constructor or something like that, it's because you haven't saved. Make sure you save all your files. Make sure you're transpiling, right? These are all things that are required. And you should see this output right here. Okay, why? Because I didn't put anything onto my contact. I made an empty contact and it took the default values that I gave it, which is no unknown name, no contact number, and unknown email address. I didn't really configure my contact. I just created a new object, right, of type contact, right? Are you with me? Anyone have issues?
I don't have.
It's okay, it's good. I am. I'm always recording, right? I'm even recording for the people online, whoever they are, right? If this is cryptic to you, right, this process, it will not be cryptic at the end, all right? But you need to kind of follow along with me, especially if you haven't done OOP before, and understand the things that's going on. Let me just go through this one more time, and then I'll talk about this. I'm going to put my code up on GitHub now, all right? So again, I'm going to control backtick here, and I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say added the contact class. And then please go up and git push, and please go up on GitHub and take a look at my code and compare it to your code. And we'll take a short break, 5 minutes. Sorry. And when we come back, get hydrated, go to the washroom and come back, do that kind of stuff. When we come back, we'll do more. Okay. So let's do that.